I always thought overnight shifts were boring. The store I worked in was small, tucked into a quiet street on the edge of town. A convenience store, open 24 hours, stocked with rows of soda bottles, chips, canned goods, and the usual items people grab at odd hours. I'd only been working nights for a few weeks, and most of the time, the hardest thing was fighting off drowsiness. But something about that particular night felt different. It was late September, the air outside crisp with the first hints of autumn. The store was silent except for the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. I just finished mopping the back aisle and was leaning on the counter, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, when I noticed the faintest movement in one of the security camera screens. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The cameras often glitched, and sometimes the grainy feed made shadows look like they were shifting. But when I looked closer, I saw it, a figure. They were standing at the far end of aisle 3, right in front of the canned soup section. Just standing there, still as a mannequin. My heart gave a little jolt. The door hadn't chimed. No one had come in. I checked the time. 1:47 a.m., too late for a rush, too early for the drunk crowd. I looked up from a monitor toward aisle 3. Nothing. I exhaled, telling myself it was the poor quality of the cameras again. I laughed softly at myself, but my throat felt tight. To calm down, I walked over to aisle 3, dragging my shoes on the floor so the sound felt less lonely. It was empty, of course. Rows of soup cans stared back at me, labels gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I told myself I needed more sleep, but when I returned to the counter and glanced at the monitor again, my stomach dropped. The figure was back. Same aisle, same spot, but this time they were facing the camera directly. I froze, my fingers still gripping the counter. The person on the screen was too clear now to be a glitch. They were tall, almost unnaturally so, their head brushing against the top of the shelf. The camera didn't catch details of the face. It looked like a smear, a blur, as if the lens itself refused to focus on it. I looked down the aisles again. Empty. My pulse thudded in my ears. I glanced back at the screen. The figure hadn't moved. Every logical part of my brain told me it was a prank. Maybe someone had slipped in without me hearing the bell. Maybe a coworker was messing with me. But I was the only one scheduled that night. I grabbed the flashlight we kept under the counter and walked down the aisle again, my hand trembling just enough to make the beam jitter across the products. The soup cans reflected cold, white circles of light. The aisle was still deserted. I turned in a slow circle. Silence. No footsteps, no breathing, no rustling. Just a faint hum of refrigeration from the back coolers. When I returned to the counter, I hesitated before looking at the screen again. My chest was tight, my throat dry. I forced myself to glance. The figure was closer. Now it was in aisle 2. I hadn't heard a thing. I muttered under my breath, swore at the cameras, swore at my own nerves. I pulled my phone out, hovering over the number for the manager, but stopped. What would I even say? That a shadow on the grainy security feed was scaring me? The store suddenly felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in on your eardrums until you start hearing phantom sounds. I thought I heard a whisper, low and unintelligible, drifting from aisle 2. The flashlight beam shook violently as I raised it. I didn't want to check again, but some irrational part of me couldn't stand not knowing. I crept toward the aisle, every step echoing on the tile floor like gunshots. I turned the corner, and there was nothing. But the shelves looked different. The cans weren't aligned the way I remembered. They were stacked higher, impossibly higher, reaching almost to the ceiling. And as I stared, I swear I saw them shift. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I stumbled backward, my shoulder hitting the shelf hard enough to rattle jars and boxes. The sound crashed through the silence, and then it wasn't silent anymore. Whispers. They came from every direction at once. Faint, layered, dozens of voices all muttering over each other in a language I couldn't recognize. They slid into my ears like oil, and I clamped my hands over the sides of my head, but it didn't help. I bolted down the aisle, nearly tripping over my own feet, and skidded back behind the counter. My eyes darted to the security screens. The figure was in aisle 1 now. Too close. Almost at the end of the row. Its blurred face seemed to tilt toward the camera, like it knew I was watching. I grabbed the phone, but the line was dead. Not even a dial tone. Just static. The front doors suddenly rattled. Not opened, not shut, rattled, violently, as if someone was shaking them from the outside. I spun toward them, and my stomach turned cold. The glass was fogged over. Thick condensation, dripping from the inside, like the store itself was breathing. My flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. When I picked it up and swung it toward the door, a shape pressed against the glass. A face. No features, just a flat smear of darkness where the eyes and mouth should have been. I backed away, breathing hard, and glanced at the monitors again. The figure was gone. Every camera showed empty aisles. But I knew it wasn't empty, because I could hear footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from just beyond the counter. The steps grew louder, echoing against the linoleum. My heart hammered so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I ducked behind the counter, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, the beam trembling across my shaking fingers. I could see the shadow before I saw the figure itself. It stretched long across the floor, impossibly long, reaching out toward me. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath. And then, slowly, I heard the sound of something dragging. Not footsteps now, more like fingers scraping along the shelves, pulling products to the ground as it moved. One by one, boxes toppled, cans rolled, until the whole aisle echoed with crashing. I forced myself to peek over the counter. The aisles were shaking. Not the items, not the shelves, the entire aisles. They swayed back and forth like trees in the wind, though the air was still. Lights flickered above, buzzing louder, drowning out the whispers that had returned. The figure appeared again, stepping into view at the end of the aisle. It was taller now, towering, its head grazing the ceiling, its body stretching and folding as though it didn't fit inside human dimensions. Its faceless head turned toward me. I panicked. I ran for the back exit, my sneakers squeaking on the tile. The door burst open into the alley, the cold night air slapping my face. I didn't look back. I just ran. By the time I stopped, my lungs burning, I was 3 blocks away. The store glowed faintly in the distance, lights still flickering inside. The next morning, I tried to tell my manager what had happened. But when we checked the cameras, the feeds were blank. No figure. No whispers, no all shaking. Just hours of empty footage, as if I'd spent the night alone, pacing the aisles like a madman. I quit that job the same day, but sometimes when I drive past that store late at night, I see the glass fog from the inside, and something standing there, watching. The store was never meant to stay open 24 hours. That was the owner's decision after the big supermarket chain opened down the road. He figured if he couldn't compete with prices, he could at least catch the late-night crowd. And so, every week, one unlucky employee got the graveyard shift. This week, it was me. At first, I thought it would be easy money. No customers, just me, the hum of the refrigerators, and maybe a magazine at the counter. But after 3 nights in a row, I started to notice the little things. The clock above the counter ticked too slow, then too fast. The buzzing of the overhead lights came in uneven pulses, almost like a broken heartbeat. The security cameras sometimes flickered to static, but only for certain aisles, never the same ones twice. On this night, the 4th of my week, the silence felt heavy. The kind of silence where you know you aren't really alone. At exactly 2:11 a.m., I heard the first sound. It came from the back storage room. A sharp slam, like a pallet dropping. I froze at the register. No deliveries were scheduled. No one else had a key. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and went to check. The storage door was closed, padlock intact. I leaned in to listen. Nothing. Just the soft crackle of the bulb above me. I almost turned back when something changed. The padlock was gone. Not broken. Not on the floor. Just gone. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the storage room wasn't right. The rows of boxed goods seemed longer, deeper. I could swear I saw movement between the stacks, something ducking behind the pallets, quick and deliberate. "Hello." My voice cracked in the stillness. No answer. I stepped inside, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The air was cold, damp, as though the storm outside had seeped in. I walked a few feet, the beam glinting off shrink wrap and cardboard. Then the boxes ended, and the hallway began. A narrow corridor, concrete walls, stretching far further than the store's layout should allow. At the far end, faint light glowed like a lantern in fog. My gut told me to run, but my legs carried me forward, step by step, into the impossible space. The further I went, the quieter everything became. I couldn't even hear the storm anymore. The air pressed close around me, and the glow ahead sharpened into a flickering fluorescent bulb above a door. The door was metal, dented, with a small glass window. Behind the glass, just for a moment, I thought I saw someone standing there, not moving, watching, and then the bulb overhead popped, shattering in a shower of sparks, leaving me in the dark. I staggered back as the bulb shattered, glass crunching under my shoes. My flashlight beam wavered wildly until it landed again on the metal door. The window was empty now. Whatever I thought I'd seen was gone. I should have turned back. I should have locked the storage door, called the owner, even called the cops if I had to. But something pulled me forward. Not curiosity, not even fear. It was like the space itself wanted me deeper inside. The handle was cold when I touched it, slick with moisture as if it had just been rained on. I pushed, and the door opened with a moan. On the other side wasn't more storage. It was another part of the store, only it wasn't right. The aisles were there, canned food, cereal, bottled water, but they stretched impossibly long, vanishing into shadows. The ceiling was higher, black wires dangling like vines. The shelves looked older, dustier, with labels I didn't recognize. Some brands didn't exist anymore. Some were in languages I couldn't read. I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping across warped tiles. Every step echoed, as though the store were hollow. Then, behind me, the door slammed shut. The bang reverberated so hard it rattled the shelves. I spun around, but the door was gone. Nothing but an unbroken row of shelves stacked with rusted cans. I was trapped. I tried telling myself it was a dream, that maybe I'd nodded off at the counter. But the sweat dripping down my neck, the burning rubber smell in the air, the sting of glass still stuck in my shoe, they all told me this was real. That was when I heard the wheels. A soft squeak, 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 like a cart rolling slowly down the aisle. My flashlight shook in my hand as I aimed toward the sound. At the far end of the aisle, something moved. A shopping cart appeared from the dark, rattling forward on its own. It stopped halfway, then turned slightly, as if inviting me closer. I whispered to myself, "Nope, not doing this." But when I turned to run the other way, the aisle had changed. It no longer led to the registers, just another stretch of endless shelves. I walked toward the cart, each step making my throat tighter. The closer I got, the more wrong it looked. The metal wasn't shiny, but corroded, eaten through in places. Something thick and black was smeared across the handle. And inside were items that hadn't been sold for decades. A bottle of soda in a glass container I recognized from childhood. A box of cereal with a cartoon mascot long since retired. A magazine dated 30 years ago. I reached out to touch one of the boxes. It was wet. The second my finger brushed it, every aisle light flickered on at once, buzzing overhead. And at the far end of the store, where the glow just barely reached, I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them. Standing perfectly still at the ends of the aisles. Their outlines blurry, as if hidden by fog. One of them tilted its head, sharp, unnatural, like an insect hearing something it didn't understand. Then another took a step forward. I dropped the box back into the cart, the wetness still clinging to my skin. My heart hammered as the sound of shuffling feet spread through the aisles. They weren't waiting anymore. They were coming. I froze, my flashlight beam slicing across the aisle as the figures advanced. Their steps weren't heavy, but soft, dragging, like bare feet on tile. The shuffling grew louder, echoing from every direction. I couldn't tell how many there were, but the sound multiplied until it felt like a crowd pressing in from all sides. I ran. My shoes pounded against the floor, slipping on dust and grime as I cut down one aisle, then another. Each time I turned, the shelves looked identical. Rows of old products, warped labels, and brands I didn't recognize. It felt like running in circles, though my lungs burned as if I'd sprinted miles. I stopped only when I realized the shuffling had gone silent. I dared to shine my light behind me. The aisle was empty. I exhaled, clutching the shelf for support. My skin felt clammy, my vision swimming from panic. That's when I heard it, a whisper. It wasn't words, more like dozens of breaths exhaling at once. Cold air brushed the back of my neck. I spun around. A face was inches from mine. Pale, gray, hollow eyes wide and unblinking. Its mouth hung open, but no sound came out, only a hiss of air escaping its throat. I stumbled back, my flashlight clattering to the floor. It rolled, beams spinning wildly until it lit up the aisle. Dozens of faces were watching me. They weren't moving closer now. They just stood, blocking the aisle in both directions. Their skin sagged like wax melting in heat, clothes shredded and faded, some drenched in stains. A few had jaws unhinged, hanging at impossible angles. One stepped forward, its arms stretched out, longer than it should have been, fingers curling like claws. I bolted sideways, slamming through an end cap and scattering dusty boxes to the floor. My breath tore at my throat as I cut through another aisle, not caring where it led. I had to find an exit. At the far end of the aisle, I saw light. Not the flicker of failing bulbs, but daylight, streaming through the glass doors at the front of the store. I sprinted, ignoring the pounding behind me, the sharp taps of something skittering along the ceiling. My legs burned, but the glow grew brighter. I reached the doors and shoved them. They didn't budge. I slammed my shoulder against the glass, pounding until my fists went numb. The light was real. I could see the cracked parking lot outside, the highway, the endless black trees. But the doors were like concrete, refusing to move. Behind me, the shuffling returned. I spun around, chest heaving. The figures were closer now, filling the aisles, pressing forward in silence. The whispers rose again, overlapping until they sounded like static, a storm of voices whispering nothing and everything at once. My eyes darted around desperately. A fire exit, a window, anything. That's when I noticed the ceiling tiles directly above me were shifting. Something crawled across them, distorting the panels. Limbs bent at grotesque angles pressed against the flimsy material, and from one broken seam, a gray hand dangled down, twitching. I backed away, heart hammering so hard I thought I'd faint. The hand curled once like beckoning. Then, with a sudden tearing sound, the entire tile gave way. Something fell from the ceiling. It didn't hit the ground. It hung there, suspended, swaying like a puppet on strings. Its head snapped toward me, its mouth stretching open until the jaw nearly split in half. And from that darkness came the sound I dreaded all along. Not words, not whispers, but my own voice, calling my name. The sound of my own voice calling from that thing's mouth froze me where I stood. It wasn't just mimicry. It was perfect. Every intonation, every nervous tremble. It was like hearing myself from a recording, only stretched into something sinister. The figures at the aisles began to move again, their steps syncing with the broken, hanging creature swaying from the ceiling. Its limbs jerked like marionette strings yanked too hard. The air turned suffocating, thick with the coppery stench of rot. I couldn't move. My legs refused. Then it spoke again, my voice, but this time it whispered a phrase I hadn't heard in years. Don't be late for your shift. The words hit like a punch. My father used to say that when I dragged my feet going to work at a shop, there was no way anything in this place could know that. The spell broke. I ran. I tore back into the aisles, not caring which direction. My only thought was escape. My flashlight still lay abandoned on the floor, beams sputtering weakly, but I didn't stop for it. Instead, I followed the shelves until I reached another door. A plain, metal one, half hidden behind stacks of yellow newspapers. I yanked it open. Darkness. A staircase leading down. I hesitated, every instinct screaming not to descend. But behind me, the whispers swelled into a roar, the shuffling closing in fast. With no choice, I plunged into the stairwell. The steps seemed endless. My shoes slapped concrete until my thighs burned, until my chest begged for air. At last, the stairs ended in another door. I shoved through and found myself back in the store. But it wasn't the same. The aisles were gone. Instead, the room was wide, empty, walls coated in peeling paint. In the center sat a single checkout counter, and on it my flashlight, still glowing. I staggered toward it, fingers brushing the handle. The moment I picked it up, every bulb in the ceiling burst, plunging me into darkness. The light from my flashlight became the only glow. I swung it around desperately. The counter was gone. The shelves were back. And I was standing where I'd been at the very beginning, in front of the metal storage door. The bulb above it flickered the same way it had before. The same shadowy movement passed behind the tiny window. It had all looped. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered, spinning its beam across the floor until it landed on something that made my stomach drop. Footprints, wet ones, leading away from the storage door, leading toward the counter. And they were mine. My hands shook violently. The whisper rose again, close enough to brush the hairs on my ear. This time, there was no mistaking the words. You never left. The sound of the store's front bell jingled, the door opening. I sprinted, desperate, screaming for air, for freedom, for light. But when I reached the glass doors, they weren't glass anymore. They were mirrors. And in the reflection, I didn't see myself. I saw rows and rows of empty aisles. Endless. Waiting? When the storm rolled in, I didn't have much of a choice but to stay. The store was empty, the streets outside washed clean by heavy rain, and I was the only clerk on duty. Normally, storms brought in at least a few last-minute customers. People rushing in for batteries, bottled water, or just shelter. But that night, not a single soul passed through the doors. By midnight, the windows were fogged with condensation, the outside world swallowed by blackness and sheets of rain. Even the neon sign above the entrance flickered and died, leaving the inside of the store as the only lit island for blocks. The strangest thing was how quiet it was. Usually, the storm's rumble would leak through the glass, thunder booming like a drum. But in here, I could hear only the buzz of the coolers, the soft hum of the lights, and the occasional tick-tick-tick of the wall clock above the lottery display. At first, I tried to keep busy, straightening shelves, rearranging the gum rack, wiping down the counter. But when the clock ticked past 12:30, I noticed something that made me pause. The aisles weren't lined up the way they should be. I'd walked them hundreds of times, stocked them, memorized where everything went. Chips and snacks in aisle 1, canned goods in aisle 2, cleaning supplies in 3. I knew them by heart. But when I looked down aisle 1, it seemed longer than it should have been. Much longer. I walked to the end, and instead of the cooler section at the back wall, there was another turn. I frowned, rubbed my eyes, then kept walking. The turn led to another row of shelves, but they weren't ours. They were taller, older, the wood stained dark and warped as if from years of damp. The fluorescent lights above hummed louder here, and the smell was different. Musty, like a basement left to rot. I stopped dead in my tracks. When I turned back toward the counter, the short row of snack shelves had vanished. Behind me stretched the same endless rows of warped wooden shelving, lit in sterile white light. The storm outside had disappeared. The clock's ticking was gone. I wasn't in the store anymore. At least, not the same store. And yet, every shelf was filled with products. But none of them had labels I recognized. At first glance, the items almost looked normal. Jars of something thick and red, boxes wrapped in faded cardboard, cans with peeling paint. But when I lifted one of the jars, the glass was sticky. The lid was rusted shut. Inside, the red wasn't smooth like sauce. It clung in strands like veins pressed against the glass. I set it back down quickly, my hands trembling. I walked faster, weaving through the aisles, searching for any sign of the real store. The rows twisted in impossible angles, looping back on themselves. I passed a freezer case filled with packages that hissed softly, as if something inside them was breathing. Then came the sounds. Not thunder, not rain. Whispers. They were faint at first, so low I thought they were my imagination. But the further I went, the clearer they became. Dozens of voices murmuring in unison, too quick for me to catch a single word. They rose and fell like the tide, filling the aisles with their presence. I broke into a jog. Everywhere I turned, more shelves, more jars, more whispering, until I reached the counter. It looked exactly like mine: register, gum display, even the stack of scratch tickets. For a moment, relief flooded me. I darted behind the counter, grabbed the phone, and pressed it to my ear. Static. I slammed it down, panic rising. Then I noticed the clock. The same clock that had hung above the lottery display in the real store. Only now the hands spun wildly, faster and faster, blurring into a black circle. I stumbled backward, knocking the gum display to the floor. Packs scattered like teeth across the tiles. That was when the lights flickered. Once, twice, and in the stuttering dark, I saw movement at the far end of the aisles. A shape, tall, thin, stretching above the shelves. Watching me, I ducked down behind the counter, my chest heaving. I didn't dare breathe too loud. The whispers had grown louder now, layered and urgent, like they were calling something forward. The shape moved again. I could hear it, the faint scrape of something brushing against shelves, the slow rhythm of its steps. I peeked over the counter just once. It was closer, too tall, its head hidden in shadow, even beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights. Its arms hung down unnaturally long, fingers dragging along the shelves as it passed. Wherever it touched, the products warped and melted, jars sagging like wet paper, boxes collapsing inward. It stopped in front of the counter. I crouched low, pressing myself against the wood. My heart hammered in my throat. Then, slowly, a hand slid over the top of the counter. Long, pale fingers curled over the edge. Nails black, cracked, dragging deep grooves into the laminate. I squeezed my eyes shut. I couldn't move. The whispers rose into a chorus, filling my skull. My ears rang with them, words I didn't understand, but the meaning seared into me all the same. Stay, stay, stay. I couldn't tell if it was the voices or my own thoughts anymore. The counter shuddered as the thing leaned closer. I felt the air shift, cold, damp, reeking of mold and dust. Something brushed against my shoulder, so lightly it could have been imagined. And then, suddenly, the lights snapped off. The whispers stopped. I was swallowed in total, suffocating black. I don't know how long I sat there, crouched in the dark. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? The silence pressed in on me until it became unbearable. I forced myself to stand. My legs shook beneath me as I fumbled forward, one hand stretched out in front, the other gripping the counter for balance. The surface felt wrong now, wet, soft, as if it were rotting wood instead of laminate. Then, ahead, a faint light. I stumbled toward it, desperate, shoving past shelves that felt narrower now, closing in on me. The light grew brighter until I saw it. The front door. My store's front door. I ran. I didn't look back. I shoved it open and burst into the rain. The storm was still raging. Thunder rolled across the sky, and the neon sign above the entrance sputtered weakly back to life. Behind me, through the glass, I could see the familiar aisles again. Clean, ordinary, stocked with chips and soda. But the floor beneath my shoes was sticky. I looked down. My footprints were dark red, trailing from the door back into the store. And even over the rain, I thought I could hear it. The whispers, faint, muffled, coming from the shelves inside. Waiting,